Welcome, everybody. We should begin the way we normally do by introducing ourselves. So, Natalie, please.
Absolutely. Hey guys, I'm Natalie Handy, and I am one of two sisters who are co hosts of the Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver podcast. And we are super thrilled that you are here with us for session 4 of the Caregiver's Playbook. And my very favorite counterpart
Is Dr. Guy Maytal. I am a psychiatrist and chief medical officer at Forge Health. And Forge is a company dedicated to providing effective, affordable, and accessible mental health care for general concerns, but especially for people and families dealing with cancer. So, really welcome this evening. And I'm
Mm.
just get started by
Let's get right into it.
sharing the slides. So let's do it. And hopefully,
And as Guy is sharing the slides, we do want to tell you that just mentally, we think that we're going to go over just a little bit. We may go over by about 10 minutes, but that's because we're doing the recap as well. So if anybody has to jump at 7:30, we understand the recording will be on our YouTube channels. And so no worries at all, but definitely we're packing it in again today.
great. Well, again, welcome to Natalie. Do you want to just walk us through?
Yeah, let's do it. So we've gone through just really quickly. We've gone through session 1, 2, and 3, and tonight we are here to talk about life after caregiving and what that really looks like. And I'm going to tell you guys, it is different than what you think it is when you're right in the middle of it. And I'll leave it at that. And so I think that's what you're going to find, and we're really excited to be here with you.
Yeah. And as we've said before, this is a conversation that builds on itself week after week. So let's just quickly walk through where the road that we have passed so that you can be here for tonight's conversation. So at session 1, we talked about the overall context of being a caregiver, that the experience is universal. You'll either need a caregiver or be a caregiver, and that anyone and everyone can be a caregiver, but most people don't identify as that, certainly not at the beginning, and that there are many reasons to be a caregiver, whether you are stepping in as a matter of duty or pulled in, even if you don't want to, or jump in because you simply love the person. And that either way, it's a job and you've got it and you need to deal with it. And at session 2, we talked about navigating your new role and its impact of doing so on yourself, on your well being, on your psychological experience, and on the making sense of things in your life inside of this new reality. And at the same time, despite all the confusion and challenges and difficulties and burdens, it is also imperative that you maintain self care. In fact, it's essential. And last session, we walked through your relationship as a caregiver with the rest of the world, with the people in your life, communicating with your friends and loved ones, with the places that you engage with the healthcare system, with your work, with your finances, even with your spiritual community. And we started to engage in the world of what does it look like to create a purpose for myself inside of this new reality.
And today we're very excited to share a couple of things. But before we kind of move forward, we know we had a lot in our last session, and we want to kind of revisit purpose one more time. There were a couple more things or points we wanted to hit on that we wanted to be mindful of our time last time. We're also going to talk about transitioning, though, out of caregiving. That is very different than at the beginning of care and in the middle of it. And I don't think there's enough conversation about what life is like after caregiving and how you can actually proactively prepare to transition out of that. And then, of course, reinventing yourself, taking this as an opportunity, because I'm going to tell you, at the end of caregiving, you are different. And so, do you take this opportunity to reinvent yourself and the relationships around you? I think we're going to give you some things that are going to really make you think.
Wonderful. Well, to paraphrase the philosopher and psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, a person can deal with any situation when they have a powerful enough why. And so it is not trivial to think about what is the purpose of my life in this new setting. Because in no matter where you are, there you are. The circumstances are what they are. And as we talked about last session, the circumstances certainly have an impact on you and on your life. But you get to say your relationship to them. And that's where you have a say in the matter of how you're going to be in this particular situation. And the reality of caregiving, the reality of this new role that you did not expect and almost certainly didn't want, is an opportunity actually to create a new purpose for myself in my life. Said another way, it's an opportunity that despite the way things look, despite the challenges, the even experience of overwhelm or crisis, it's an opportunity to take control of your life, to take it back. Or to quote Carl Jung, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become.
Mm. I do love that. And guys, we really had a good time with sending out the questions after each session. This was the first time for me to send out survey questions in preparation for the next. And we got so many great responses back. So we thank you for taking time to give us feedback. So in looking at our survey responses, the one of the questions was around looking to life after caregiving and what were you really expecting? And so this is what the hopefulness was. Freedom and personal fulfillment, emotional and social reconnection. I think about my own life after my husband's active treatment. His tomorrow, and it seems appropriate, he was diagnosed 3 years ago tomorrow, he was diagnosed with a head and neck cancer. And 10 months later, we got the all clear. And I had no clue what it was going to look like after, but I had a thought of what it would. And grief and loss, I don't know that I expected that. And many of you said, hey, I'm thinking about this. And then future planning and stability. Absolutely. What's the future going to look like? Because we're being positive. But there was also uncertainty. But in looking back, for folks as they looked back and said what was kind of unexpected, um, I think that, and I've got a couple of notes here. There was the ongoing or the unexpected caregiving. Definitely for me, that was one. Some found themselves still caregiving or taking on caregiving responsibilities sooner than expected. Many caregivers don't just have one stint of caring. They go through multiple stints of caring. And we've had guests on there, they're in their third or fourth time caring for someone, or they might be caring for two or three people at the same time. There is the emotional adjustment and lingering connection. So adjusting to life after caregiving took time. And they had the lingering feelings and thoughts that went along with it. And then there's also the preparedness and life transition. So some felt unexpectedly well prepared due to the tools and support that they received during caregiving, while others felt that, they experienced unforeseen life changes, job shifts, definitely me, and that impacted their caregiving journey.
And we're about to transition to the next slide, but I just want to make a note, Nat, if I could,
Please.
that tonight's conversation is going to be a little bit more poetry than we had before. There's something about this particular world of life after that you can only get so far with kind of facts and
Yeah.
uh, remembrances. There's something that the poetic can evoke that transcends that. So stay tuned.
Mm, I think you're going to like it. And so, as we're thinking about how we transition out of caregiving, you think about the new life. Do you think of, I'm going into a new life, or are you thinking or expecting you're going back to your old life? And the reality is, we already talked a little bit about that, is can you really go back to your old life? And I don't think you really can. I think that life continues to evolve. And so it will look a little bit different. Even if there's small changes, there are still changes. So as we go on to the next, we're going to look at caregiving responsibilities, that they do eventually shift, and they shift either through recovery or loss. You're going to see responsibilities. And when I think about responsibilities, we've got it on the next, there's practical type of action oriented or things that you're responsible for. So when, we were recovering, or my husband was recovering after active treatment, I thought maybe he would take on some of the responsibilities that I had taken on. But we realized some of his side effects didn't allow him to. Again, shoveling snow. And so, as it's very poetic that it snowed this week here, and I was out shoveling snow again. And that's okay. And it's really resetting your expectations for the both of you. I think it's really important as caregivers to remember that your loved one is also in recovery. And so they're thinking they might be able to go back. And that's really where I think it's so important for you to align. You're also going to have changes in your emotions, your thoughts and feelings that come with preparing, but you can prepare for this as you're thinking about transitioning. And so the strategies and things that you'll apply during active caregiving, you may be able to continue applying well after caregiving ends.
Thanks, Nat. And one other thing to add to this
Please.
is it, we've been talking, of course, about the experience of the things, thoughts about the challenges, the rewards of a caregiver. But as you all know, you're caring for someone who's on their own journey, as you were mentioning, Natalie.
Mhm.
And they, as much as they don't understand, really, they don't really get what you've been going through. You don't really get what they've been going through. And the part of the preparation for life after is how do you um, deal with that?
Mm,
So, but before we get there, we're going to continue to engage with this conversation for identity and purpose because caregiving obviously alters your sense of yourself, your relationships, your expectations from life, but we rarely think about how it changes who we are for ourselves. Like, who am I? What's my place in the world? And compared to now, the whole conversation of how was it supposed to go, meaning it wasn't supposed to go this way.
mm-mm. Well, and it's funny, Guy, I can tell you it wasn't supposed to go this way concept really resonates. And you guys may say in the chat, what are the things that you didn't expect to go the way that it did? We used to ride motorcycles. We used to go kayaking. We used to go do a lot of things that we can't do now. And we've had to transition into other things that we can do together. And then also individually, we change. So the
'Cause,
question is, I like this, Guy.
yeah, the question is, who am I now?
Mhm.
Now that caregiving is transitioning, I'm transitioning away from being a caregiver. Who am I now? It's as powerful a question as am I a caregiver was at the beginning of the process.
I was looking at Donna's comment in there, having been a caregiver for 15 years and kind of wondering, who am I now? And so, but here's the thing. This question's really important, and this is something I don't think we really talk about a lot again, is when does caregiving end? And we always think of life as a beginning and an end, and we have different chapters and things like that. So we think, well, eventually this has to end. And I'm sure, Donna, you were thinking after 15 years, I think it's about time. And so, the reality is, respectfully, it's a long time. And so, but when does caregiving end? Does it end with the death of a loved one? The answer is yes, but not really. Maybe not, because there's a lot of things that you're required to do. Just because your loved one has transitioned on doesn't mean that there's all these tasks and responsibility related to settling, whether their estate or figuring out what needs to be done. There's a lot of things. And for some people, they don't want to talk about their own death and they leave a lot of things unsettled. There's also the recovery of a loved one, in my case. Yes, but not entirely. I can tell you that I have not stopped caregiving. And that is one thing I thought that I would stop. I would get to go back to being a wife. And I can tell you, I didn't feel like a wife again until maybe 8 months after we had ended his active treatment. And so I think caregiving really is going to shape who we are, and it offers us opportunities to build resilience. And that resilience comes from through the stress that we experience, but it's in how we respond to those stresses that allows us to strengthen our resilience and manage the next stressful event that comes before us and manage it well. Because if you think about how you were at the beginning of your caregiving journey and how you are now, do you feel like you're managing it better? And even if you were caregiver to one person and then the next episode of caregiving comes on, how did you respond to that? Again, you may say the second time I was smarter and I knew how to manage it better and I was able to deal with it a little bit better. Again, you get to be the author of your next chapter.
And so the experience that we'll touch on now is the experience of life after caregiving. And it's shaped by a variety of factors. Everyone who is a caregiver and completes the experience of being a caregiver has a unique and distinct experience of that because you're influenced by many different factors, including the type of relationship you had with the person you were caring for. Was it a parent? Was it a child? Was it a spouse? There's a difference between the expected progress of time when a parent passes before their child. There is the absolute tragedy of a child passing before their parent. Were you did you like the person you were caring for? Was it a tense and difficult relationship, or was it one that was filled with love and regard?
Mm.
What was the duration and intensity of the caregiving experience? Were you engaged in caregiving 30 hours a week with someone who required constant attention, or 5 hours a week? And of course, the impact of the whole process on the major areas of life. How impacted were your finances? Was your work life? Was your health and others? And lastly, was the death expected or sudden? Any and all of these combined to provide the unique experience of someone after caregiving. And inside of that, when even with all of that experience, you have to deal with the uncertainty of what's next. The uncertainty of, my goodness, I have spent this amount of time, months, years, decades being a caregiver. And now what? Now, how do I navigate what's next when I'm not a caregiver? Well, the first thing we invite you to consider is you really can navigate the unknown, even if it's almost unimaginable. Even if you know that the experience is over, especially if your loved one passes, they die and you don't. The question of how can I go on without them? And yet here I am standing breathing. It's almost like you're living with the unimaginable. Like until it actually happens, you can't fully imagine the experience or grasp the experience of it.
So Guy mentioned that, we added some poetry in here and this resonated with me and I was like, "Ooh, I want to read this one because it resonates." And if you look at the image plus the words is just so profound to me. Because there is a sense of loss in many ways. And so we find a place for what we lose. Although we know that after such a loss, the acute stage of mourning will subside, we also know that we shall remain inconsolable and will never find a substitute. That no matter what may fill the gap, even if it be filled completely, it will nevertheless remains something else. And so I think about that in the sense of there is the grief, there is the loss, there is this gap. And the thing is that it's okay if you feel like I don't want to feel it. You may not even want to feel it. You may want to say, I want it to be there, but you may surround it and to make sure that it doesn't engulf you, really. And so as we think about life after caregiving, I want us to focus really on you. So why not? Why not take this opportunity to make changes that you may have already wanted to change about yourself? And especially in the middle of caregiving, you're thinking about, I'm different. You're seeing that you're different. And you may think, oh, I feel like I'm changing, but there may be even more opportunity after caregiving that you say, I'm going to take this step. I'm going to do this. I had actually at one point thought, and I don't think Guy knows this, I was going to be a yoga instructor because yoga was really great. Now, mind you, I didn't follow through with it because I'm a little clumsy, but um, I will tell you that was something I was interested in that I would have never thought to do for myself. There were other things though that I did. So renegotiating your life, your relationships, and to everything in life, it really starts with you, and then with or without your loved one, it's how will you relate to the world, the people, the places, and your own personal purpose. And we're going to continue to say over, we're empowering you to be the author of your story. You get to make that decision of how you want to move on and how you want to live moving forward.
And at the same time, we don't want to deny the reality of grief.
Hmm.
And grief is messy. You know, we're filled with judgments about grief, our own and others. And we often have the experience of people judging us for how we're grieving or not grieving. You should cry more, you should cry less, etc. But there's no right or wrong way to grieve. And grief exists. It exists at the moment of becoming a caregiver. It exists during caregiving. It exists afterwards. Grief as the experience of losing things that you were not expect to lose that are deeply important to you, whether it's a present reality or a future that you were envisioning.
Mm.
And whether or not your loved one survives, the emotional impact of grief remains. And
Yeah,
yeah,
and say it leaves an imprint on in your heart and in your mind. It leaves that grief will leave an imprint. But I'm going to tell you, here's the good side. You can grieve and be happy. That is the reality is it's again, it just ebbs and flows. And there will be moments that you may be doing something that you absolutely love that you take a step back and maybe a sensation, a smell, a song, as we all love songs, may take you back to a time with your loved one or a time when you and your loved one used to have that shared experience that you can't do anymore. And so I look at that grief and I choose to be happy because it's a happy memory. And I choose to be happy for the opportunity to have experienced that versus grieve for the fact that I can't do it anymore. And so I think there is space for you to be able to hold on to the memory and then also embrace your new opportunities.
and it's messy. There's a poem by Mary Oliver that we really like called When that seemed pretty fitting for this moment. And the poem goes like this: when it's over, it's over. And we don't know, any of us, what happens then. So I try not to miss anything. I think in my whole life, I've never missed the full moon or the slipper of its coming back or a kiss. Well, yes, especially a kiss. And at first reading this poem, you might think this poem is saying, I try not to miss out anything. But that's actually not what the poem says. She tries not to miss anything because the moment I miss something is the moment I'm not present here and now. And so I can't really be here now if I'm busy missing something.
Mm.
And at the same time, Mary Oliver points to the deep and profound humanity that, of course, we miss the things we love. They're both true, and they both coexist.
And so death and recovery, they take you down two very distinct paths, especially as my caregivers on here that are on here, and you may know what path you're going to take. I mean, the reality is that we will all pass at some point, whether it is from a cancer or from my mom's Parkinson or from an accident. We don't know. But if you think about the two, it's really about how are you going to respond to it. And that's why I really like this slide. It's really about the experience of death versus the experience of recovery. And, we looked at this and how we wanted to put this slide together because they're so similar and yet so different when you shift the lens based on death versus recovery. So does caregiving end at death or at recovery? Or does it simply change? That's what you have to look at, is it just an evolution? Does it continue to evolve? You may say, well, death is very absolute. And yes, caregiving ends, but it may be that you're caring for yourself. And, but also with recovery, it changes. And it absolutely, when you experience death, you may have confusion over it or even feel like a state of crisis. Similarly, you can feel the exact same when your person has experienced recovery. And is it over? Is it really over? And again, very vantage points of, I don't think it really is. I think it continues to evolve. And so, which is why we need to, renegotiate our relationship to life. Karen, I saw your comment about like, how can I move on? Well, my question to you is, how can you not? What are you keeping yourself? Why do you choose to punish yourself for the death of someone else? And so I would tell you, you know, moving on does not mean that you are forgetting. It just doesn't mean that.
And it also doesn't mean that you're feeling a particular way. You can move on and feel sad and feel grief. It's that world of and that we keep pointing to. And the the thing that we're pointing at is that we live life like we're in some story, like a movie, a 2-hour movie, even one of these 10-hour Netflix series.
Well, that's a good
There's a
one.
there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then the movie's over. And then you go home. Except that's not life. Life is something happens, and then something happens, and then something happens, and then something else happens. And it could be desirable, undesirable, good or bad. And it just goes on and on. So life is not a story, it's a soap opera where there's one challenge or victory after the other, one crisis after the other. So constant reinvention is required because change is the only constant. And life keeps moving, whether we like it or not, and whether we're ready or not.
So, how do I reinvent my relationships? And I think the first piece of it is really acknowledging that truly things have changed. And here's the key: so have you. So have you. You have changed. You have evolved. And you have to decide, do I like the person that I've become? Or do I take this opportunity to continue to evolve and do something more than? And I'm going to tell you, again, this is going to have a ripple effect right into your relationships. People are going to be looking at you, seeing what happens, what's happening to you. And they're going to want to say they'll either support it or they won't. But understand that this reinvention, if you're wanting to reinvent relationships, you cannot wait on the people around you. They're still standing still. They're still in the same place. Their life hasn't been put upside down. And so it may be hard for them to say, well, what are you doing? Why should you be so happy? Or you haven't grieved long enough. It's a long enough thing. And there's a lot of judgment in that. And the reality is I encourage you to take a look and say, what do I want to do differently? This is the opportunity. So get moving. Grant yourself permission to move on while still remembering, respecting, and caring for the person that you did care for. It doesn't mean their life was invalid. It just simply means you have permission to continue living.
And like the saying goes, no wine before it's time.
Oh, I love no wine before it's time.
If you're feeling stuck, then you're feeling stuck. And there's nothing wrong with that either. It's all part of the experience. And so, like we said, life beyond caregiving is a world. And most folks who engage in the world of caregiving are often with the experience of being pretty isolated. Maybe you're thriving, maybe you're not, but you're alone dealing with it in a way that others might not. But afterwards, that can't be the way you get through it. The world beyond caregiving requires reaching out. It requires connecting with others. It requires contributing to others from what you've learned and what you've experienced. And that is a much more joyful, hopeful, and effective way to engage. And there's no beating yourself up if you're not doing that. Because, like we said, change is inevitable and unavoidable. And we entitled this side embracing change. And that could be read as a cliche because you hear that all the time. But when we say embrace change, we mean it like that slide a few back with the couple embracing, like embracing change the way you embrace a loved one. It's there either way. You could either be angry at it or you could embrace it. Because fundamentally, we don't have control over most things. And yet we live as if the way things are is the way they're going to be. And we get upset when things change, which, of course, when you stop and think about it, is both incredibly human and a little bit silly. So, one of the things that we invite you to take on, this is like a little gift, is take on something that allows you to weather the change, something that lets you be present, to be here right now, whatever that is. Whether it's meditation, whether it's a walk in the woods, whether it's dancing, whether it's listening to music, whether it's cooking, whether it's whatever. But take something on that's just yours, that lets you be here now and ride the roller coaster with your hands up in the air rather than screaming and closing your eyes.
I am a roller coaster rider, people. So I will say, it's hard to believe we are at the end of our time and at the end of our session, and honestly, the series. And so for this session recap, real quick, we talked about purpose. We wanted to revisit that one more time to really like hone in to say this is the opportunity for you to really help identify your purpose, even if you're not really sure, or is there a shift, and giving you permission to move with that. We're also transitioning out of caregiving and how you can be proactive. So if you are a caregiver now and you're in the middle of it, I think it is thinking about as you transition out of caregiving, whether the person passes or they are in recovery, and what do you want your life to look like? Because you can be proactive in doing that. Or if you are after, then what do you want that to look like for yourself? What do you want your life to look like? And giving yourself permission to reinvent yourself. The people took the pandemic to reinvent themselves. You can take this life-changing experience and make yourself what you really want. And your relationships, because some of your relationships will not follow you once you get into caregiving, in the middle of it, and even after. And that's okay.
And so, like Natalie said, we're nearing the end of our time together. So, we wanted to take a few minutes to recap the journey that we've been on these last 4 weeks. And we've actually covered quite a bit. Well, here are some key insights that either you remember or hearing for the first time. But we started with caregiving is universal. Either Everyone will either need a caregiver or be one, and it is a job, but it's much more than that, given the emotional bonds between the caregiver and the person being cared for. And as for who are caregivers, well, anybody, family, friends, professionals, and mostly, certainly at the beginning, don't identify as that. And however you got the job, it's your job. And so the challenges and rewards of that are a function of, in part, do I embrace it or resist it? But there are challenges, and they're physical and emotional and mental and others. And there's also the opportunity for a deep sense of fulfillment and joy, regard, and even love. And the balancing it all is key. And the thing about learning how to balance is you fall a lot. So if you're only people learning how to balance, fall. So part of balancing is self-care, which is essential and certainly not selfish. And one of the things that we've been talking about throughout our time together is the world of and, that there is no one way caregiving should be and one that it shouldn't be. It's all of it. It's the joy and the exhaustion and the isolation and the rewards. It's about embracing the struggles and the victories.
Lots of and it's also about navigating, and that caregiving maybe ends through recovery or loss, but it's the impact on your life and your future decisions that really last. It truly does reshape your identity. It has for me personally. It's reshaped my relationships, and it's also reshaped my life direction because I quit my job 6 months after caregiving, after Jason's active treatment. I'm not even going to say after caregiving ended, because I look at it, his treatment in the middle and his post treatment, and our lives took very different directions, and it's actually been for us for the better. And so, when you think about your purpose and redefining purpose, life won't go back to normal, but it can evolve in meaningful ways. And the grief and the relief, again, often exist together, and they're both valid. I encourage you just to embrace both of them, especially grief and happiness at the same time. And it can be hard to find the happy. When you're grieving, it can be hard to find the silver lining or the slivers. But it is knowing that you wake up and say, I am going to think about 3 things I'm grateful for, that I'm happy about today, or before you go to bed. Those are the things that help you come back to say, my life is not over. And then strategies to move forward. That was one of them. But, acknowledging change, seeking support, and being intentional with these things. Prioritize yourself. And that is in the middle of caregiving and after. And I'm going to tell you, again, you are the author of your next chapter. What do you want to write? And so for our key takeaways, we're going to say, ask for help so you can get help, and get help if you need it. Take action. Do not let perfect be the enemy of good. Some days you are just good to get out of bed, make sure your person's taken care of, got their meds, got fed, got to your appointments, got home, done. Other days you may say, well, I did better. Counseling is a good thing, and because life evolves, and I'm going to tell you, people don't stay in counseling necessarily for life. They may go in and out of it. It may be clinical counseling. It may be general counseling, non-clinical counseling. And why wait until honestly that it's over to get the help that you need, whether it's support groups, whether it's listening to a podcast like ours where you get to relate to other caregivers and find solutions, or it's doing groups. So, Guy, I think Forge has a caregiver group that you guys are going to be starting.
Yeah. So we're starting a caregiver group. It's virtual. It's for people in the state of New Jersey, and it's designed to support people who are caregivers or people who have recently been caregivers to get through the experience together and to learn from and contribute to each other. And if you're not in the state of New Jersey, we're going to be sending an email tomorrow with an opportunity to let us know if that's something that is important to you, that matters to you, and we can think about how to create or provide those things in the future.
Absolutely.
And as a final reflection, as
That's
we conclude, um, leaving you with one last bit of poetry from the poet Brendan Kelly, which is, though we live in a world that dreams of ending, that always seems about to give in, something that will not acknowledge conclusion insists that we forever begin. So we thank you for being on this journey with us. We thank you for letting us be on your journey. And we would love to hear from you. We appreciate you. And one last thing is, caregivers care for each other, and you learn best from one another. And so we invite you to share these videos with people who have not had access to them, who would benefit from them, who have just started caregiving or just completed caregiving or in the middle of caregiving. And we're going to send you an email with the links to those videos tomorrow as well. And obviously they're free and you can watch them as often as you want to. So, Natalie?
Guys, thank you so much for joining us. And You have our email addresses, is my answer. We will definitely be staying connected, and you can look for future trainings from Guy and myself, including probably my sister as well. But you'll look for future trainings from us. We'll be reaching out as we come. So thank you so much for being part of the Caregivers Playbook series.
Thank you, everybody.